Hey everybody, welcome to Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. Tonight we're going to be talking about iodine. A lot of people are really concerned right now over iodine, whether or not you should be high dosing or taking more, as a result of the nuclear scares in recent news. And so we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about, whether or not you can be allergic to iodine. We're going to be talking about dosing. We're going to be talking about disease associations and why you need iodine. So make sure you stay with me all the way to the end. And we'll cover all of those topics as well. If you have questions about iodine, go ahead and start typing those in now. I'll do my best to answer them as we go through the show, but it's first come, first serve. So those are the rules. Welcome to Crash Course on Iodine. Should you stock up on iodine? Before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about why iodine is so important. I think if you understand these things, you'll understand a little bit better the answers to the questions tonight. So one of the key functions of iodine, this is often one of the most overlooked issues in medicine today, is thyroid hormone. So if you can imagine your thyroid gland, which sits in your neck, it receives a message from your pituitary gland through a chemical called TSH. TSH stands for thyroid stimulating hormone. Now, if you've ever been to a doctor to have your levels checked, oftentimes when you've been told you have hypothyroidism, what they're checking is your TSH, right? So this is common test. This is a test the doctor will commonly run to check whether or not you have high or low thyroid. Now, it's unfortunate because so many doctors run TSH, and this is the entirety of their investigation, meaning they don't check often. That's not, I say all doctors do this, but it's just my experience. Many doctors, they only check and monitor TSH, but they fail to check T4 and T3 and something called reverse T3, and they fail to check the vitamins and the minerals that are necessary to make TSH and to make thyroid hormone, T4 and T3. So again, T4 is also a test that should be getting measured. T3 is a test that should be getting measured. So if you've been told you had hypo or hyperthyroidism, these are the things that your doctor absolutely hands down should be measuring every time. But most doctors only measure this. And so it's looking at part of a puzzle. Imagine you've got 50 puzzle pieces and you have one piece that you're looking at. It's not a very comprehensive way to go about evaluating somebody. But what I want you to understand is that T4, the 4 is iodine. That's what it is. And so it means that that T4 has 4 molecules, if you will, of iodine attached to it. The T is tyrosine. So it's basically, tyrosine's an amino acid. So 4 molecules of iodine plus tyrosine equals T4. And that's why it's so important to understand your nutrition. Because if you don't know whether or not you have a tyrosine deficiency and you don't know whether or not you have an iodine deficiency, you never really know why your T4 is low. And that's a mistake, right? If your doctor doesn't know why, then taking medicine doesn't necessarily resolve why. It just gives you an artificial synthetic chemical to supplant what your body should naturally be able to make. So when we think about iodine, why is it so important to think about this? Because iodine, you can't make T4 without it. And T4 has to be converted to T3, which you can see down here. Most of this occurs in muscle and liver tissue, so T4 is converted into T3. And T3 is what's required. It's the active form, if you will, to active thyroid hormone, whereas T4 is inactive. And so it's required to increase metabolic function, right? And this is why. Why is this important? You can't heal, you can't repair tissue if you don't have adequate thyroid hormone. And this is why, we'll get into this in just a minute, the symptoms of low thyroid are oftentimes, they cross over with the symptoms of low iodine. So if you've been told you have hypothyroidism, but you've never had your iodine levels checked, you've never had your tyrosine levels checked, you've never had your zinc, you've never had your B2, your vitamin C, your vitamin A, your vitamin D, your omega-3 fatty acid levels checked, it's important that you understand you really haven't had your thyroid checked. You've had one chemical maybe 3 chemicals checked, but no nuance as to how your body is capable of producing those chemicals with the right vitamins and minerals. And so iodine plays the major role here. And if you can't get to healing and you can't get to repairing, you're dead in the water. So it's one of iodine's major functions. Now, symptoms of iodine deficiency, this is why there's so many of them. And so they, again, I told you a minute ago, they cross over a lot with thyroid being too low, right? So hypothyroid, I would say, is one of the disease states of an iodine deficiency. And those symptoms: fatigue, brain fog, muscle pain. Okay, we can add more to this list. What else would we say happens? Hair loss. We get eyebrow thinning, especially the lateral third of the eyebrow. A lot of times we'll see constipation. Are very, very common symptoms. Again, these are very common symptoms of hypothyroid, which is caused by iodine deficiency. Now, if we're talking about other diseases and other issues, failure to thrive. This occurs in children trying to grow. We see this a lot in countries and in regions where iodine is very poor in the soil, and there's no supplementation in place. So FTT, failure to thrive, that's growth and developmental issues that can occur in infants. We'll see cretinism, or mental retardation, in children with iodine deficiency. Women and men, decreased fertility. Goiter, which is a nodule in the neck. It's what happens when you don't have enough iodine, is the thyroid gland, it gets bigger as a result of trying to produce thyroid hormone, but it doesn't have enough of the raw ingredients. And so the follicles in the gland itself actually grow, get bigger, creating that goiter or that nodule in the neck. So that nodule in the neck, that goiter, is oftentimes a sign of iodine deficiency. And then we have other things that can occur that are quite common. Fibrocystic breast tissue. So women, if you have a lot of breast tenderness and breast pain, this a lot of times can have to do with iodine deficit. Iodine also plays a role in progesterone production. And so again, very, very important for healthy breast tissue. So hypothyroidism, it can kill you, right? Ultimately, low iodine can cause you to die. So it's an important nutrient. It's an essential nutrient. What does essential mean? Essential means your body cannot survive without it. Your body cannot function without it. And so one of the questions I sometimes get is, am I allergic to iodine? We'll get to that here in just a few minutes. I want to talk a little bit, and we'll bring this up and blow this up, about gluten in iodine, because it's a common, where do we go here? This is a common problem that we see in people with gluten issues. And so this is a recent study done. It was a longitudinal pilot study done on non-autoimmune thyroid disorders as a common finding in gluten sensitivity celiac patients, more frequent than in the general population. And so the authors of this study set out to understand why. Why is that happening? And here's what they found, because this is the first time it's ever really been studied specifically for celiac and iodine. We found that iodine absorption in celiac children is impaired compared to the general population. Okay, we should regularly, and their conclusion is we should regularly reinforce the need for proper iodine intake in celiac disease patients to reduce iodine deficiency risk. Why is this so important to understand? Well, I think it's in what I just read to you, but it's more common for hypothyroidism, non-autoimmune hypothyroidism, but actually it's also more common in autoimmune thyroid disease. But specifically, non-autoimmune thyroid dysfunction is more common in celiac patients, meaning what they found is iodine deficiency as a result of gluten-induced intestinal damage. Now, that being the case, if you've got a history of gluten sensitivity and you never had your iodine checked and you're struggling with low thyroid and you don't know why, we can try to make that correlation a little bit more clear. But the other thing we know, aside from the autoimmune, or aside from the non-autoimmune, in essence, the iodine deficiency aspect, is we know that celiac actually have a greater tendency or greater risk of developing Hashimoto's, which is the autoimmune version of low thyroid. So we know that both can occur. The autoimmune process can occur, but the malnutrition process can occur, leading to low thyroid hormone function because of iodine deficiency. So that is something that you also want to understand. Those of you following me on the gluten-free diet, you want to understand that it's important to monitor it and it's important to measure it. Ask your doctor to measure it. If they're not measuring it, ask them why they're not measuring it. Take them that research study, screenshot these studies. And if you subscribe to my newsletter, you get access to all this information in your inbox. It's free. All you have to do is go visit us at glutenfreestudy.org. Now, iodine. Let's talk about iodine and radiation, because this is, all the rage right now. Everybody's talking about, the potential for nuclear weapon use, and to protect yourself from that radiation using iodine. So what do we know about that? So it's not that iodine is not like this magical anti-radiation pill that you take. It's that the radiation itself will be attracted to your thyroid tissue, to your thyroid gland. And what the studies and what the research shows is that if your thyroid gland is saturated with enough iodine, so if your thyroid gland has iodine saturation, then it will block, there's channels on your thyroid gland called SYN porters. Iodine saturation will block radioactive material from getting into your thyroid gland. And so it will block that from happening. But iodine is not going to stop you. If you have nuclear fallout, taking a bunch of iodine is not going to stop nuclear fallout from damaging your skin, damaging your eyes, damaging your GI tract, damaging other tissues in your body. It's very, very specific for breast and really for thyroid tissue. At least that's what the research has to say about taking iodine. And so prophylactically, there's a salt called potassium iodide, and you can get it from, the doctors can write it for you, but you can get it over the counter, potassium iodide. And so an adult, if there is a radioactive fallout and you're trying to, let's say you're not in the course of a war, let's use Fukushima as the example, because that probably is the most realistic example that we've seen. Chernobyl and Fukushima, where the radioactive materials breach, if you will, was in the environment. It was in the water, it was in the air. And so what they found is that people that took higher doses of potassium iodide protected themselves, protected their thyroid gland, and so it reduces that potential for cancer in that gland. But if you get direct radiation, you've got bigger problems than trying to worry about taking iodine. So I don't want all of you thinking that somehow iodine is this cure-all or catch-all for radiation fallout. Now, if you're not in the vicinity of the radiation, meaning you're further away, but there may be some radiation that makes its way into your body through the food supply, or through the water, or in part through the air, but you're not in that major fallout zone. This is where potassium iodide can be very helpful. And what we saw with Fukushima, and they actually did the studies. There were a number of studies done on kids during Fukushima, the adolescents. They were monitoring those that received potassium iodide versus those that did not, and found less incidence of cancers. After many years, they found less incidence of damage to the organ and gland. So and that's not the only time we've seen, iodine be researched as it relates to radiation and cancers, but we know it can reduce that risk. Now, some of you are, okay, well, if that's true and I want to reduce my risk, how much to take? Well, the average adult, it's about 180 milligrams. But again, that's not potassium iodide, and I don't recommend that you go out and try to do that. And it's definitely not something that you do on a daily basis. This is like a bolus dose. But what I would recommend, if you're trying to be preventative and you're trying to understand, okay, how can I make sure that I'm as protected as much as possible right now, even from Fukushima? A lot of our seafood is contaminated with radiation. you can use a much more reasonable amount, somewhere in that 12.5 milligram, for an adult a day dose. And so this is actually, I've seen this in my clinic for years. 12.5 milligrams is very safe. It's very low for any kind of potential reactivity or problems. And you can do this on your own for the most part. Now, it's a lot more than the RDA, the recommended daily allowance that the U.S. puts forward. But the RDA is wrong on a lot of things. It's wrong in the sense that it doesn't take into account a number of different scientific facts. Probably one of the biggest is that the RDAs were originally developed based upon the quantity of a nutrient necessary to prevent frank overt disease from manifesting. So as an example, the RDA for vitamin C is the quantity of vitamin C a person needs to make sure they get to not have full-blown scurvy. But if we look at nutrition from the perspective of, you don't go from from deficiency of a nutrient. Let's change our color here. We'll use our scurvy example, okay? So you don't go from healthy to scurvy just because you didn't get enough vitamin C today, right? So, and then there's healthy, there's scurvy, and then there's points upon this line that are what we call subclinical. And so these are the symptoms that manifest before major disease, because scurvy is basically, it's schizophrenic mind. You go crazy, your teeth are falling out, your collagen can't form, and you're hemorrhaging internally. You don't want that. That can kill you. But like I said, you're not going to go from one to the next. So what happens is a person might go through this phase of subclinical deficiency where they're just not getting enough over a long enough period of time. Their body uses up more and more of their storage and then ends up with a full-blown disease state. Well, the same thing can be said of iodine. And so those recommendations are largely based on how much do you take to prevent frank and overt disease. One of the things that we did with iodine in the U.S., actually, let's pull up another diagram here. Here we go. You can see it in this map very clearly. So the yellow areas along the globe are areas that are considered to be low iodine soils. Okay, so if you look at this globally, if you're in the UK, you're pretty much in trouble, right? The entire soil base there is low iodine. You can see, along in mid Europe and in Italy and above. You can see a lot of China, you can see a lot of Africa and parts of Australia, but here in the U.S. we have what's called the goiter belt around the Great Lakes. And so this is one of the reasons why really smart and intelligent doctors found in the early 1900s that goiter, which is again an enlargement of the thyroid, was as a result of low iodine. So low iodine in the soil. And these people were farming the land and they were eating the food and they were not getting adequate iodine, and they were eating the fish out of the Great Lakes, but of course there's not much iodine there, so you're not really getting enough iodine, and so your thyroid gland can't keep up, and so you start to develop a goiter. And this is one of the reasons why we iodize salt. If you ever look on like your traditional salt, it's got iodine in it, and this was a policy passed, by the U.S. government in order to prevent goiter from becoming or from maintaining its epidemic status as a major cause of disease. So just adding iodine to the salt, and why? Because salt was the primary preservative of the age. So this, again, not that salt's not used as a preservative today, but we have other types of chemical preservatives that are being used, and so. If you're, and the other trend that we've seen is a lot of people quit using salt. So there's a reduction of salt intake today because of scares or fears of hypertension, right? You take in too much salt, it can raise your blood pressure, increase your risk for heart disease. And so a lot of doctors have said, cut out the salt, low sodium diets, right? I wouldn't blame salt as much as I would blame MSG, which is they're a little bit different. MSG for high blood pressure, MSG and food processing would be what I would generally tend to blame over just saying salt is the cause of this, because it's not really salt per se. Salt's actually good for you. Now, that chemically loaded version of table salt that's being mass produced today is not something that I generally recommend high quantities of. I would go for different types of salt, your rock salts, your pink salts, those types, your sea salts. And I would go for iodine supplementation if you live in that goiter belt or you live in regions where there's not enough iodine in the soil, and that's where you're garnering or getting your vegetables and fruits from. Because outside of that, the food sources of iodine are relatively low if you don't eat seafood. Seafood is hands down one of the best places you can get it. Kelp, seaweed, and seafood directly are great sources, or can be, of iodine, but not if you live in these areas. So again, pay attention to that, take note of that, because it's important depending on where you live and where you're getting your iodine. Now, I was talking earlier about iodine allergy, and I wanted to address this because it's a question that comes up a lot. I've been told I was allergic to iodine, or I went in and I did a radioactive dye test, and I had a bad reaction, and my doctor told me I was iodine allergic. Or I hear this too: I'm shellfish allergic, that must mean I'm iodine allergic, right? There's a lot of misinformation out there about iodine allergy. First, just let me say this: you cannot be allergic to iodine. It's impossible. You can't be allergic to iodine. Why? Iodine's an essential human nutrient. It's essential. Your body can't function without iodine. So it's impossible for you to be allergic to it. So if you've been told you're allergic to it, it's not because you are, it's because you've been given misinformation. Now what happens to many of you is you do like a test that contains a radioactive iodine, and you have a poor reaction to it. Most likely what you're reacting to is not the iodine. You're most likely reacting to the radioactive substance, or you're reacting to some of the other fillers that are in it. And so again, don't blame the iodine. Your body needs it. And there are a number of different iodine-containing compounds that are administered medicinally or medically. And again, you can't be allergic to the iodine, but you can be allergic to the other ingredients within that product. So it's important to understand that. So iodine is an essential human nutrient found in the thyroid gland. It's used in the sense, as I showed you earlier, used in the synthesis of the thyroid hormones, thyroxine and triiodothyroxine, which is T4 and T3, right? And so this was a study, a full-blown kind of research literature review. So the results of the literature review indicated that iodine has not been shown to be the allergen responsible for allergic reactions to iodinated contrast media, amiodarone, povidone iodine, and other iodine-containing compounds. So again, these are just commonly iodine-containing compounds that people react to, again, not because of the iodine. Iodine is not the issue. There's a lack of evidence to support cross-reactivity between iodine-containing compounds and so-called iodine-allergic individuals. So if you've had a bad reaction, think more along the lines of I reacted to something other than the iodine, whatever that was within that agent, whether it was a dye or a contrast or whatever it might have been. But you cannot be allergic to iodine. It's important to understand that. I see that all the time. People are scared to death of taking some iodine because somewhere along the lines they had a non-nutritionally trained doctor or healthcare provider tell them that they were somehow allergic to it, and it was just, or they assumed there was this allergy. Okay, so let's talk about food sources. If we're talking about grain-free, gluten-free food sources of iodine, in my opinion, one of the best places to get it is wild-caught seafood. Now, what did we say earlier is that a lot of this seafood from the Fukushima fallout is radiation contaminated. So, the iodine in them, are you getting radiation? Is the iodine within the seafood itself just neutralizing the radiation, or are you also getting exposure to radiation? And it's not having much of an effect. Nobody knows. It's not really been really well studied. That's not to deter you from eating seafood, but I would say, this is a caution that we do have around seafood, is that Fukushima radiation fallout. Now, again, that was years ago, but and we know it's still part of the problem. This is one of the reasons why I like iodine supplementation. It's why if you ever look at my multivitamin formulation, one of the ingredients in it, and most multis don't, is iodine. And this is one of the reasons why, because one of your best sources of natural iodine in the diet is radiation contamination. Now you can eat kelp and you can eat seaweed, but they come from the same ocean, And so the same problem exists there. You can also eat pasture eggs, but this is going to be dependent on the soil where the chickens are grown. And so depending on where you're getting your eggs from, you may or may not be getting adequate iodine from that particular soil. Same thing with organic A2 milk. Now, some people with gluten issues have cross-reactivity to dairy, and so that would be a bad idea for those of you that have that issue. If you're not quite sure what A2 milk is versus other kinds of milk, you need to go back and review my discussion on A1, A2. It's very important because a lot of people react to dairy and they don't even know why. But these are going to be three of your main sources. And so this, for most people with gluten issues, is out. This is radiated, which leaves us here. Now, what is a pastured egg? This leads us to the definition of what a pastured egg is, or what a cage-free. This is what a lot of you buy. They label them as cage-free. Now, cage-free just means they're not in a cage. Cage-free, basically, if you call a manufacturer a chicken farmer, cage-free means they're really in a cage, but instead of the door being, this is my little chicken in here. I'm a terrible artist, by the way, in case you couldn't tell. That little chicken is still inside. The door is open, but they're not really free, truly free to roam about. They're predominantly cage-free because technically this isn't a cage because the door's open, but they're still not really free-ranging. You want free range where they're out there eating bugs and grass, digging in the dirt. This is what you want with your birds, right? Because that's going to give you the healthiest egg. So if you're looking at cage-free and you can't get clarity on what that means from the manufacturer of that egg company, then what you're probably looking at is nothing better than regular conventional egg. You want free-range, happy chickens roaming around, getting sunshine, getting exercise, and eating the dirt and the soil and the bugs and the grass and everything else. That's where they're going to get that iodine to make that egg iodine rich for you. So again, these are some of your best sources, but they're limited. Again, it's one of the reasons why I'm an advocate of supplementation. Okay, so we're going to have this up for you on Gluten Free Society. So again, if you come visit us over there, we'll have all these recipes up, but these are just different recipes that my team and I put together for you that are options that are rich in iodine and grain-free. So if you're looking at how you can incorporate more iodine in your diet through food, we've got 5 really fantastic recipes there for you as well. All right, let's jump into questions. I know we're probably going to have quite a few on this topic. So, dealing with osteoarthritis pain in both my ankles, and was wondering with going gluten-free and diet change, have you seen osteoarthritis reverse? Is it possible to rebuild cartilage? Yes. And depending on the extent of the damage, a lot of times when I hear orthopedists give a patient, they tell them, you've got bone on bone. That's not 100% true. Most people don't have bone on bone. It's pretty rare. You've got to be pretty decrepit, pretty injured to have bone on bone. And so most cases of osteoarthritis are really nothing more than advanced cases of lack of movement that can be reversed with adequate movement and mobility training. Okay. Can you get iodine from going in the ocean every day? I don't know that anybody's ever studied iodine absorption through the skin, so I don't know the answer. That's a great question. I've not seen any research that we could say that's been adequately studied to say yes or no. Gargling your throat with salt water is probably not going to lead to much iodine in terms of adequacy for you. I'm wondering if iodine is good for women with fibroids and cystic breast. You know, I've seen it do wonders for women with fibroids and cystic breast tissue issues, Angie. So again, simple thing. If you want to understand where you're at with iodine, get it measured. There's different ways to measure it, but you can do iodine in the blood. My favorite way to measure it is what's called a loading test. And so a loading test and it's the most accurate way to do it, it's a urine collection, but before you take your urine, you take 50 milligrams of iodine, and it's typically a Lugol solution, and 50 milligrams, and then you collect urine for 24 hours. And what you're actually looking for on that follow-up test is you're looking for a person to excrete or get rid of or pee out 40 plus milligrams of the iodine bolus. So that's how much should come out in the urine over a 24-hour period of time after loading with that quantity of iodine. And if you see this coming out, then that person's tissues are adequately saturated with iodine and their body is getting rid of the excess. If you see less than this, less than 40, then you definitely have an issue with iodine saturation in your tissues, predominantly your breast tissue and your thyroid tissue. How many drops of Lugol solution is it safe to take? Depends on what the dosing is for what you've got, the preparation that you've got. But again, generally speaking, it's very safe. You keep your iodine levels 12.5 milligrams a day and less. It's very safe. You don't really have much to worry about in terms of side effects or toxicity. There are cultures across the world that eat that much in their diet because the seafood diet is so heavy. Most Americans don't come anywhere near close to that. Should you take cofactors with higher doses of iodine, i.e. riboflavin and selenium? Well, there's some research studies, Lane, that show that, it's a great question, that selenium, zinc, vitamin A, and iron. So these are nutrients, minerals that are very important and synergistically help with the efficiency of iodine. And so the answer to that question, in my opinion, is yes. You should make sure that you're not deficient in these nutrients. More specifically, I kind of bungled that word. That reads vitamin A. Selenium, zinc, vitamin A, and iron help your iodine work more efficiently. And so knowing what your status is of these nutrients as well is important, because for example, if your vitamin A levels are low, right, and you're driving up your iodine to produce more T3, in order to talk to your cell, because that's what happens inside your cell, you have what are called nuclear receptors on the nuclear receptors on the cell nucleus, and those receptors are basically, they're vitamin A receptors or retinoic acid receptors, and so vitamin A and T3 combine to form what's called a dimer, and they unlock the cell itself, and then that's what increases your metabolic function. So if you're taking a bunch of iodine but don't have adequate vitamin A, that final mechanism of increase in metabolism can be hindered. So again, that's just an example. But yes, cofactors with the iodine are important. Again, that's why we don't look at, we're talking about tonight iodine in it kind of almost like in its own little bubble. But nutrients never work in a bubble. They're synergistic with the other nutrients, and so that's why most foods, you don't eat one food that only contains one nutrient. Foods generally contain multitudes of hundreds of nutrients, thousands of nutrients if we consider the phytonutrients, and even the unknowns. But they work together, they work synergistically. So it's always best to try to get as much adequacy within your food. But the problem is, again, if you live in an area or region where there's not iodine adequacy, and we also have to consider the soil and the way that food is farmed today. The soil is vastly depleted. The nutritional adequacy of the food that we are making and producing in the soil today is inferior to what it was 30, 40, 50 years ago, by far, at least by half, and in some cases by more. So, this is where supplementation comes in and can be very helpful. Is sea salt fortified with the same as traditional salt with iodine? No, it's not. Is iodine safe for those with Hashimoto's? It's a great question. A lot of people ask that. Yes, There are, I've seen some of those internet kind of reports where, where some people are out there saying if you have Hashimoto's, you should never use iodine, and that's not true. In some cases, Hashimoto's is actually exacerbated by iodine deficiency. Now, what you shouldn't do if you have Hashimoto's is you shouldn't be mega dosing iodine. You shouldn't be taking 50 milligrams a day of iodine on your own without having that properly monitored. But my advice, if you've got Hashimoto's, you've got TSH, we talked about this a minute ago, T3, T4, you got something called reverse T3. Okay, these are kind of the primary hormones that can be measured around thyroid. And then you have TPO, which is thyroid peroxidase, and then you have antithyroglobulin antibodies, which is another test. And so these are the antibody tests that help the doctor understand where your Hashimoto's is. Are your antibody levels going up? Or are they going down? And so what a lot of times happens when you take iodine, so if you're taking higher doses of iodine, let's just say you're taking 12 to 25 milligrams of iodine, when you follow up with your doctor, what happens is that iodine that you're taking increases your TSH. And I've seen it increase TSH into the 20s. So let's just say you are on iodine, your TSH goes up to 25 when you go to your doctor. Now, no, the range of TSH is 0.5 to 4.5 on most labs. So here you are taking iodine, you drive up your TSH into the 20s, your doctor's freaking out, right, because your TSH is so high. And we understand that when TSH is high, they think your thyroid is low. That's the mechanism. And so they're freaking out and they're saying, oh my gosh, you should never have taken that iodine. It's caused your thyroid to malfunction. And the reality is, this is an artificial read. It doesn't really affect how your thyroid functions in a negative way, but it does artificially drive up your TSH. Biotin does the same thing. So biotin is a B vitamin, right? It's sometimes referred to as B7 and sometimes referred to as B8. But so biotin and iodine, higher doses of these can both drive up your TSH. So again, if you've got an untrained doctor who doesn't know much about nutrition, they're freaking out and they're scaring the heck out of you, telling you to get off that toxic iodine because it's destroying your thyroid function. Nothing could be further from the truth. Iodine does not really have any impact on TPO or antithyroglobulin antibodies, so it doesn't really drive that. What happens to some people is they megadose iodine and they're at 50 plus milligrams a day, and it can drive you into hyperthyroidism. And this is rare, but it can happen. And there's a condition called Graves' disease. And so this is a hyperthyroid state, and so there are cases and reports where megadosing of high levels of iodine over time can do this. But this is why if you're going to do higher doses, you should be having it monitored and measured. Don't just go high doses forever indefinitely. That would be a mistake. But there's no danger in taking iodine for people with Hashimoto's. Let's see here. Some functional doctors say iodine can worsen Hashimoto's or underactive thyroid. I think I just answered that. That was in there twice. So if you take a drop of iodine, 640 micrograms, I mean, depending on what kind of iodine it is, it's not much. 640 is a pretty small amount. My biggest problem is high reverse T3. What could be causing this? Lots of things. So T4 converts to T3, or it converts to reverse T3 if you don't have enough selenium. So selenium runs an enzyme called deiodinase that converts T4 to T3. And like I said, if you don't have enough, if your selenium is low, your body will make reverse T3 instead. And so your reverse T3 will be driven up. Now this can also happen if your thyroid medicine's too strong. So if you're taking too much thyroid, I see this a lot in people that their doctors are giving them thyroid medicine not based on their lab, but based on their symptoms. So like you go in, you got brain fog, and your doctor says, well, let's just give you more thyroid. it's a mistake in my opinion, because then they end up over medicating people, and when you over medicate them, their body's natural defense is to convert that medicine into reverse T3, because reverse T3 is inactive, it doesn't work. So it's one of your body's mechanisms of defense to protect you from an overdose. So if you're on meds, if your thyroid meds are too strong, and generally speaking, I get this a lot too. Remember, your TSH should be between 0.5 and 4.5, but a lot of times somebody will get their TSH back and they're like 0.04 ... right? So like they're so low, they're 10 times lower on their TSH than normal, which means they're being very well over medicated to the level of hyperthyroidism, which can cause heart palpitations, hair loss, hot flashes, anxiety, trouble sleeping, a lot of those types of symptoms. So if you're on medicine and those are all happening to you, you definitely want to talk to your doctor about getting all those things measured. When testing for T4 and T3, isn't it the free test that needs to be drawn? Both. So you want total T4 and you want free T4. I didn't go into that because I didn't want to bore people with the nuance of it, but it's both. It's free and total that you want to measure, Robbie. I take kelp supplements. How much should I take, and is it a good source? So it depends on the kelp, and depends on the dose. What is it standardized to have as far as iodine is concerned? That would be the question. Are cherry angiomas caused from bromine toxicity, and can iodine help reduce or eliminate these spots? My experience, more cherry angiomas are caused by estrogen dominance, or estrogen being too high. So not so much bromine, but I'm glad you mentioned bromine, because we didn't really talk about a couple of things that relate to iodine, and one is bromine. So these three are referred to as halides. Halides are, and iodine's a halide too. They're substances within the same family of compounds. And so what happens is halides all compete. They're so similar in their properties that they compete for binding or uptake into your thyroid gland. So if your bromine levels are too high, or your fluoride's too high, or you're getting too much chlorine exposure, it will push out, basically, or compete with iodine, and can create iodine deficit, can create deficiency. And so a lot of this is why it's important too to test bromine, fluoride, and chlorine toxicity, or evaluate for it, because sometimes you can be low in iodine and the reason is one of these things, and not necessarily because you're not eating enough iodine. But where does bromine come from? It's a flame retardant. It's sprayed on fabrics, it's sprayed on carpets and other things. It's also, bromine is used in soda, it's used in certain meds. Bromine is also in bread. It's actually, if you ever seen the term brominated flour, they use bromine to condition the dough in flour. And so a lot of times when you buy a bag of flour, if you're not gluten-free, you get brominated, you get bromine in the flour. Fluoride, toothpaste, mouthwash, tea is a common source of heavy fluoride exposure. Those are probably the biggest ones outside of drinking water and water fluoride fortification, just depending on where you live. And of course, chlorine's in your drinking water, and if you're using good carbon filtration, you'll filter chlorine out. But chlorine is also in a lot of antibiotics and pesticides. Remember that bromine, fluoride, and chlorine are toxic, generally in higher amounts, and so they are used in pesticides. And so if you have your house sprayed with a lot of these different types of chemicals, you can also get exposure. But it's smart, if you have an iodine deficiency, to also check your other halides to make sure you don't have a toxicity of those driving your iodine down. My doctor only measures TSH. I have asked her. She said it's not necessary. She said it's not necessary because she doesn't know what it means, most likely. I mean, I don't want to put words in her mouth or demean her, but it is necessary. If you want a comprehensive evaluation of your health, it's necessary to look at the things involved around your thyroid. And TSH, I don't know. It's such an overly simplistic view of such a complex organ system connected to other endocrine organs, and so to demean it and diminish it by only monitoring TSH, either that doctor doesn't know these other things, or they're lazy and they just don't want to mess with it and answer your questions, or they're just I don't know. I don't want to put intention where it doesn't belong, but I just can't imagine a doctor who's trained adequately not wanting to measure more than just TSH, and in an effort to want to be thorough. Otherwise, again, they're just lazy. They just don't care. They don't, they're in healthcare for the wrong reason, and that happens. It happens in every profession. Not everybody who is a doctor is like an awesome doctor who should be a doctor, that have empathy and they love their patients. A lot of them are just in it for the paycheck because, along the way, somebody told them doctors make good money. That's just the reality of it. Okay, let's see. What about putting iodine tincture on your skin? So some people do that, where they'll put iodine on the skin, and if it absorbs rather quickly, some doctors look at that as a skin test, where a person, they would declare a person has iodine deficiency. I don't like that test as much. I don't think it's quite as reliable, and it's actually, there's a lot of room for subjectivity in that. Is urinary iodine loading test the most accurate to test iodine levels? Yes, I think I answered that one already. Should I prophylactically take iodine before a CT scan of the abdomen for some protection of radiation? It's not a bad idea. Is there a common thread of iodine deficiency with miscarriages? It can be, yes. Hypothyroidism, fibrocystic breast disease, breast cancer, uterine cancer occurring in a person over the years, and doctors never require it checked. Yes, Angie, absolutely. I mean, that would be something I would inquire more in depth about. So question about organic seaweed and how much to take for daily use. I don't know that there's a quantity that you have to take for daily use, and can you overdo the intake? Probably not going to. You'd have to eat quite a bit to overdose on seaweed. Does topical Lugol's iodine have benefits over oral administration? Not really. Iodine as a topical is more of an natural antiseptic, antibacterial, antifungal. So where iodine works really well topically, I mean, we use it with our cows before milking them. We dip their teats in iodine solution to prevent any kind of bacteria or other debris from getting, from making its way into the milk. Because when cows are being milked by hand, it's not quite as clean as those vacuum suctions that they use industrially, so you can get kick-up of dirt and debris on the cow teats. So iodine dips can help prevent stuff like that from creating an issue bacterially with the milk. But on the skin, iodine works well on cuts, scrapes, abrasions, things of that nature, to try to help prevent infection from setting in. Let's see here. Salt says no iodine. Where do I find salt with iodine? I mean, if you want salt with iodine, you buy regular old-fashioned salt at the grocery store, the table salt, if you will. It's all fortified with iodine. But again, that comes with some of its own health issues. So, I mean, that's where I go with supplementation. Does consuming raw cruciferous vegetables negatively affect the thyroid? It can. You got to get pretty high doses, though, to really cause a goitrogenic effect with cruciferous. I mean, you got to be like the juicing queen, with the raw stuff. And some people are. So in that case, yeah, it could be problematic. Is there a lab tested? I think I answered that one. Can you explain the difference between potassium iodide and nascent iodine, and when you would take one versus the other? I'm more of a fan of potassium. I'm at Lugol solution, which is a mixture of iodine and iodide over a nascent iodine. Celery tastes really salty. It is known to have, okay, so that was a comment. I see how vital iodine is for the body, but most with Hashis can't tolerate it, and it drives their TPO up. Is there a way to add iodine in a better way? I don't see that at all. And I put people on iodine on a regular basis and monitor antibodies. So I don't agree with that statement. I think that's part of the issue. I think there's a lot of people out there saying that. And I think many of the people that are out there saying that are not actually clinicians measuring that. And there's a big difference between saying it and it actually being true. Is iodine antibacterial or antiviral? It is. Is iodine a good anti-yeast for candida in the gut? There are better options for candida in the gut, in my opinion, like caprylic acid would be a better option for yeast overgrowth. Is it safe to take 3 ultra nutrient capsules a day? How many are we supposed to take? So Sarah's asking. Ultra nutrients is my multivitamin. So 4 a day is what I recommend as the actual dosing structure with ultra nutrients. It's 2 pills twice a day is for an adult is what I would recommend. Let's see here. Let's go down on the left. I used to swim in chlorine so much. Is that what caused the low iodine? Well, it certainly didn't help it. It could have been a contributing factor, but it could also have been a low diet intake. So what would I give? Would I give iodine to a 10-year-old congenital hypothyroid on levothyroxine since birth? Possibly, Melanie, but remember levothyroxine has iodine in it. That levothyroxine is synthetic T4 preparation, and there's iodine in it. I think what I would recommend is that you have your son's levels checked to see whether or not it's something that's necessary, because iodine has more roles in the body than just thyroid hormone. Yeah, good point, Lane. Lane says, I read that if iodine causes you to detox halides, which we were just talking about, you might not feel so well. That is true. If you are super overburdened with fluoride or bromine and you're taking higher levels of iodine, you might go through what's known as kind of a detox or herxing response for the first week to 2 weeks. So it is a possibility. Is kelp okay to get iodine? It's okay. It's a good food source, and you should try to get it from your food as well. Does testicular application of iodine boost testosterone? Not anything I've ever seen be effective. Yeah, so the comment earlier about TPO going up when somebody started to take iodine, you could have been, I'm glad you're bringing that back up, because you could have actually, depending on how much iodine you were taking, you may have been halide detoxing, and that may be why your deterioration occurred. But as a general rule of thumb, I would look at the dose and see where you fell, because I just don't see that in people that have Hashimoto's that take supplemental iodine. We just don't see their TPO go up in and of itself on its own as a consequence of iodine. So Mary's asking, I'm very confused. I had my thyroid killed with radioactive iodine. I have since developed an allergy to shellfish. Is iodine safe for me to take in a supplement? Yes. It is safe for you to take. If you have an allergy to shellfish, it's not the same thing. There are other things in shellfish beyond iodine. And even if you don't have a thyroid that's functioning, that was radio shut down, you can still take iodine. And doesn't mean you're allergic to iodine. Let's see, let's go down on that left. Oh, go down a little bit more. Had radiation in 2014 for Graves, had a reaction to it, and I have been so sick since. My TSH at one point was 112. My doctor said my organs were starting to fail. Even after a constant battle of adjusting my tyrosine dose, we still cannot get my TSH within normal steady range. Likes to hang out around 8 or so. I've been on 2 different meds at once because they could not get my levels under control, and they only check my vitamin D, which is low at times. TSH, T3, T4, nothing else. I have symptoms of both hyper and hypo. You got to get a full workup, Amanda. I mean, there's 17 nutrients that are necessary to help regulate your thyroid. whether you're producing it or whether you're taking it medicinally. And so you might want to go back and look at my nutritional show on the thyroid, my crash course, and get educated, and then go in and visit your doctor with that knowledge so that you can get better evaluated. So if thyroid is saturated by fluoride instead of by iodine, then you've got to use iodine to push the fluoride out of it. And that sometimes has to be the case. Sometimes you do use higher doses of iodine as a strategy to push the fluoride out. Would organic maca powder be a great natural alternative to boost iodine in the diet? I would say great might be an overstatement, but not to say that it couldn't be helpful. So Diane says, I use Celtic sea salt, live in Wisconsin, do not eat. Wisconsin is part of the goiter belt. I have a 2% iodine Lugol solution, but I'm not sure how much to take. Well, I definitely would start off with getting in at least 300-400 micrograms a day. That's not going to hurt you by any stretch, but get your levels checked. Because if you also can't eat eggs, you really want to get them checked to see where you stand, how low you actually are, and whether or not you need, higher doses or not. Is it possible to reverse a shellfish allergy? Not an anaphylactic one. So if you eat it and your lips swell and your throat constricts, probably not going to reverse that. But if you've got a kind of a milder one, then it may be possible, just depending. Are there any supplements you would not want to take at the same time as iodine? I would say, charcoal, bentonite clay, anything that acts as a binding agent or a chelator to metal, you probably wouldn't want to take it at the same time. But as a general rule, not nutrient supplements. Okay, let's see. Keep going. Okay. So how much iodine should I take as a supplement? Again, the 12.5 milligrams a day is super safe for most people. But if you're going to do any kind of long-term higher levels of iodine, because 12.5 milligrams is about 8,000% of the daily dose. So you want to you probably want to have your levels checked and not just take it indefinitely. But it's a good starting point. But following up with your doc for measurement is always a better place to go with it. Are any supplements? Okay, I answered that one. With thyroid adenoma, is it likely that iodine supplementation will leverage a detox? Anything to look out for? Not necessarily. I mean, I wouldn't consider a thyroid adenoma to be problematic with iodine. But again, if you have any concerns about that possibility, check your levels. You can never go wrong with measuring before you supplement. You can never go wrong in that regard. Okay. Can I add iodine to my soil for my veggie patch? You can. You can add it. You certainly can. There's nothing wrong with doing that. But if you have, I would say this, you certainly can add it, but if you're, well, again, it depends on where you live too, Kelly. But if you're composting your own soil, with healthy plant materials and manure, things like grass clippings and hay, you should have a really nutritionally dense soil, unless again you're in a goiter belt somewhere. Any positive, negative effects of iodine on gallstones? No. Is a topical application on the wrist a good way of absorbing? You'll get some. I mean, I like oral better. If I have been diagnosed with hyperthyroid and then Hashimoto's, how often should I conduct a loading test? I think as long as you're going to stay on higher doses of it. If you're taking anywhere, from especially if you're 20 plus milligrams a day of iodine, you should have a loading test done potentially every 3 to 6 months as a tool to help you understand whether or not you're getting too much. Okay, I think I covered all the ones I can see. It's all right, we're out of time anyway, so how do you like that? Another Monday down in the books. So before we wrap things up, if you have any topics or questions that you'd like to see me cover in the future, don't hesitate to reach out to us at glutenology@gmail.com and forward those on over. We try to serve you the best we can. And so, if you've got topic or show topics that you'd like to see in the future, make sure you let us know what those are, and we'll do our best if they apply to a broad audience to get you a good show going. And if it doesn't, we'll try our best to get you an answer topic specific. If you're not subscribed to Gluten Free Society, then make sure you head over to glutenfreesociety.org. It's our one way we can prevent censorship. And if you want to make sure you're getting access to the information without censorship, we encourage you to come visit us. Get on our mailing list. We won't spam you. We won't bombard you with junk, but we'll just give you a bunch of solid information that you can take. And as always, make sure, please, our mission is to save 100 million. So share this information with as many people as you can. Together we can help more people. How many people tonight could benefit from learning about iodine? How many people have hypothyroidism that have never had their iodine levels checked? That's really the bigger question. There's millions. Thyroid prescription medicine is the #1 prescribed drug in the US, and nobody's checking iodine, or very few are checking iodine. So the more you can get this message out, the more people we can help, and together we can hit that 100 million lives saved mark. Thanks so much for your patronage. Have a fantastic week. We'll see you next Monday for another episode of Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. Hey, don't forget to tune in next week, same time, 6 p.m. Central Standard Time, for another Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain show. Bring all your toughest health questions to me. I look forward to answering them. And before you leave today, make sure you hit subscribe. And once you do, click that bell. That bell is going to allow us to remind you right before we go live. But it's also going to allow us to remind you when we come out with other video content all week long. We've got lots of episodes coming your way all week long, and I don't want you to miss anything. So again, subscribe, hit that bell so that you can get notified when we have that new information put up for you. Thanks so much, and I'm wishing you excellent health. Have a great week. We'll see you next Monday night.